whenever someone brings up abortion, whenever someone brings up vaccines, whenever someone brings up these different types of areas, I'm just like, oh my God, right? Because I've been conditioned to believe that these have to be divisive issues when they don't have to be. So how do we have these reasonable conversations? I think it really starts with that spiritual level. What are you placing your attention on? Are you following what the mainstream media is saying? Are you just believing that it's just a black and white matter, that these people are like completely wrong and these people are completely right? Or is there like some type of middle ground that's not being conveyed? Because most likely there is. When you're having just a regular conversation, if you're able to take a step back and see the middle ground, empathize with people, understand where they're coming from, see that, okay, why do you support abortion? Why did you not want to get vaccinated? When you ask these questions, right, and you don't just like condescend them for like, bro, you got vaccinated, what the fuck? Or like, you don't support abortion, or like you're against abortion. We don't even have these conversations, right? It's cut off at the root and nothing else. And it's just like, we get super angry at each other without actually knowing why we hold these viewpoints, or even better, why we hold these viewpoints in general. Like I was saying before, do you just hold these viewpoints because it's the status quo? Because it's what's normal? Because someone told you it's right and you never questioned it and you never actually dove into it and developed a perspective on your own? You freely thought, you independently went out into the literature, and I'm not saying you got to go into literature, but you synthesized them, right? You crossed and compared, and you really thought for yourself, right? And developed these opinions. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to episode number 67 of the Conscious Cast. I'm your host, Cal, along with my other boy who's not currently here and has a slight cough, Mr. Jason Scalora. Shout out Mr. Jason Scalora. And you know what? Joe Iacovelli, why not? But yeah, guys, make sure you go check out episode number 66 that I just released this past Tuesday. But yeah, guys, we are just rocking solo today. We're doing a nice little solo dolo episode. It's been a minute since I've just been doing my OG type of vids where I just talk into the camera and just give my little 2 cents about different issues. I've got a list of questions. We're going to go through them, see where this takes us. And I just want to put this disclaimer out here right now. We're going to be talking about some controversial stuff. So I want you to, before you, move through this video, I just want you to try your best to keep an open mind. Try your best to keep your prejudices, your biases, your inclinations to jump to certain conclusions that you already hold, certain views, maybe about topics like we're going to talk about today, veganism, about abortion, about vaccines. And once again, we're not going to say what's right. We're not going to say what's wrong, right? I just don't want this to contaminate your view of what I'm talking about, because it's very important that we have these types of conversations, right? Because it's the only way, communication is the only way we'll be able to spread information and spread awareness on issues like this, right? And a lot of you guys know that, and if you don't, I'd be surprised if you do, if you just must just be living under a rock, which there's nothing wrong with. It's all incomplete. Actually, I take that back. But these are highly divisive issues that people just never, ever want to step their toes into, right? And even myself included, right? 100%. When someone brings up politics, I'm like, oh, brother, here we go again, right? And it's just like that same type of mindset that's applied. But I think we have to get past this. I think we have to, whether you're on the left, whether you're on the right, whether you're up or down, sideways, diagonal, I don't care what position you are. You should be open-minded to every view. You should be, if it's a serious one that has legitimate evidence and consideration, right? You should be able to listen to it and take it into consideration with your own opinion. I'm not saying you got to change your opinion. I'm not saying you got to completely dive deep within the literature. I'm just saying be open-minded and be willing to question your own opinion, because if you think you know everything, then I guess you've got everything figured out, and you don't need any more information. You just know everything, and yeah, you're good. You don't need this video, I guess. But yeah, guys, we're gonna dive right into these questions. So just keep that in mind. Just try and keep an open mind. Just try to stay as objective as possible when watching this. And this can be even a great spiritual, I guess you could say, exercise for you. So let's just say you're watching this video and I bring up things such as abortion, vaccines, veganism, right? That I'm not going to be offering my own opinion about, right? I'm just going to be kind of diving into like what the left and the right, how they have conversations about it, and other issues that we'll talk about as well. Use it as a spiritual exercise to observe your emotions, right? Observe your feelings that come up while you're like, if I bring up a certain topic and you immediately feel a certain feeling, right? And you immediately feel like you want to attack my viewpoint, or you immediately have this viewpoint ready to go, right? This happens with me with veganism when I have conversations, right? I already have it. But if I can be aware of that, right? And I can be like, okay, I know that inclination that I have, right? But I'm going to put that to the side for a second, and I'm going to try my best. I know it's hard. I'm going to try my best to stay as open-minded as possible by being aware of my emotions, my feelings, the sensations going on in my body, and I will not let that dictate the conversation I'm having here, right, and make it a very divisive issue that it doesn't have to be. And I think that is a great transition into what we are going to talk about for our first question. Shout out to the man who came up with these questions. You know who you are. For the first question, how can the left and the right side of politics have reasonable conversations about controversial topics like abortion and vaccines? Now, as I said before, unless you're living under a rock, you know that these two topics and just divisive issues in general are very, very divisive issues, i.e., people on both sides of the spectrum, right, have very, very different viewpoints. And these different viewpoints clash heads, right? It's almost as though they can never find common ground. And I want to say right here, right now, this is not a black and white matter issue, right? But the media, right? I guess you could even say the government, right? Big business, right? Support certain narratives that push one side more than the other. And I'm not saying I agree with that. Like, whatever view they're pushing, I'm not saying I agree or disagree with that. I'm just pointing out the simple fact that they support certain narratives over others, right? And so we already have this lopsided battle where one viewpoint is way more accepted on things like social media, right? And just in general conversations, depending on your location, right, is way more accepted than others. And so I think just on that alone, right, when our own politicians are actors, right, on this stage, right, just utilizing these divisive issues that they, in my opinion, don't truly care about. Maybe some of them do, right? But I think they use this as a way for them to gain attention and therefore gain supporters and therefore keep their power, which is what they really care about, right? And I know I'm kind of going to my own opinion right here, but they don't care about you. They care about their power. They care about their authority, right? They care about those type of things, right? And so kind of transitioning back to the question on hand, right? When we place our attention on things like the media, right, that show that we agree with everything they say, right? We hold the same opinions that they do, right? And so on that basis, when they don't necessarily consciously deem these issues as divisive, right? But they make them very divisive when they don't have to be, right? Meaning they add a lot of emotion into these issues, right? They add a lot of contaminated sensations that don't have to be there. And on that basis, when people are having arguments, right, they're just trying to be right rather than moving towards a solution. And so when you look at that, when people they don't have these similar goals in mind, right? When they're not trying to remain calm, right? Remain objective, right? Remain in a state of mind that allows them to discern the other person on the other side of like the abortion or the vaccine debate in a way that allows them to hear them clearly, right? They're just going to be in their own echo chamber where they never hear outside information. So how do we combat this, right? How do we combat this? We all know this is a huge divisive issue, right? And we all know we are just not even willing to have these conversations, right? Just because people know that they're so uncomfortable. People know that they're so divisive. And I'm a fan. I'm a fan. I experience this myself. Whenever someone brings up abortion, whenever someone brings up vaccines, whenever someone brings up these different types of areas, right? I'm just like, oh my God, right? Because I've been conditioned to believe that these have to be divisive issues when they don't have to be. So how do we have these reasonable conversations? I think it really starts with, if you like I was saying before, it really starts with that at that spiritual level, right? Like, what are you placing your attention on? What are you placing? Are you following what the mainstream media is saying, right? Are you just believing that it's just a black and white matter, that these people are like completely wrong and these people are completely right? Or is there like some type of middle ground that's not being conveyed, right? Because most likely there is, right? And I'm not saying that 100% of the arguments are true, right? Because I get it. Some are used as persuasion in order to gain like attention and further support for their candidate. But when you're having just a regular conversation, right? If you're able to take a step back and see the middle ground, right? Empathize with people, right? Understand where they're coming from, right? See that, okay, why do you support abortion? Why did you not want to get vaccinated, right? And when you ask these questions, right, and you don't just like condescend them for like, bro, you got vaccinated, what the fuck? Or like, you didn't get vaccinated, what? Or like, you don't support abortion, or like you're against abortion, right? We don't even have these conversations, right? It's cut off at the root and nothing else. And it's just like we get super angry at each other without actually knowing why we hold these viewpoints, or even better, why we hold these viewpoints in general. Like I was saying before, do you just hold these viewpoints because it's the status quo, because it's what's normal, because someone told you it's right and you never questioned it and you never actually dove into it and developed a perspective on your own? You freely thought, you independently went out and into the literature. And I'm not saying you got to go into literature, but you looked at sources on YouTube, you looked at sources on social media, you synthesized them, right? You crossed and compared, and you really thought for yourself, right? And developed these opinions. I think when you do that, when you really, one, you become aware of the sensations going on in your body, right? You empathize with people, where they're coming from. I know they hold a different viewpoint than me, right? You see all the emotions that come up, right? All these sensations. And you're like, okay, and you consciously make the choice. When these divisive issues comes up, right? And you're like, okay, I may not reach a solution with this person, but I'm going to give it my best fucking effort. Hold your ground, right? Sure, hold whatever viewpoints you want, but just be willing to hear the other person out, right? Be willing to completely understand their viewpoint, right? To the best of your abilities. And then I guess you could say counter that or support that, or one of the, or like a combination of the both, right? Like, I see what you're saying, right? I understand where you're coming from, but once you be aware of your emotions, right? You let that subside, and then you make the conscious choice to move towards a solution where you may change your opinion. Oh my God, you might change your opinion. Whoa. Crazy, right? Like, and not holding your beliefs as facts. I think you will be able to have reasonable conversations with emotional maturity and move towards solutions that will allow you to become a better thinker and a better person in general, because you'll be one of the few people that will be able to have difficult conversations, right? That don't have to be difficult. You'll actually make them easy, right? And I understand these are not black and white matters. The solution that you may reach, as I discussed before, may not be a solution, but at least you freaking tried. And so I think just having that empathy, right? Knowing where they're coming from, being mindful of your own emotions, right? And having that idea in your head of what goal you're trying to get out of this conversation. Are you just trying to spark up some drama? Are you just trying to like just get one up them, right? Or are you actually objectively trying to come to the truth? Because if you just have that drama mindset in your head, right, you most likely don't care about the issue. It's most likely a deep issue within you that you aren't able to solve, right? So I think you should really take a look at that if that's something that is going on within your own life and outside in the media and outside sources that are bringing information in. So I think this, once again, good transition, right? We'll move on to question number 2. All right, so where do you draw the line on hate speech? When is it too far for social media platforms to silence people? So simple enough, right? I think as long as it's tough, right? Because as I was saying before, these figures have undeniable presence on these social media platforms, right? They have a huge following. They have a lot of influence. And I get the argument that what they may be promoting isn't in the best interest of these young males or of young individuals or just the community in general, right? The general community on Instagram or social media platforms in general. So you can look at look at Andrew Tate, for example, look at Donald Trump, right? Potentially Joe Rogan, right? They bring up these controversial topics, whether it be women's rights, whether it be politics, whether it be vaccines, abortions, the like, you know. I think if they're clearly, right, like if a neutral source comes in, right, hypothetically, if a neutral source comes in and is like, this, what they're saying is really, really bad, right? It's clearly wrong, has no evidence to support it, right? And they don't have any agendas, right? Remember that. They don't have any agendas attached to their ability to analyze figures such as Joe Rogan, Andrew Tate, Donald Trump, and the like, right? And I think if a third party comes in, and I'm not talking about a third party like fact checkers that has been shown to have biases, that has been shown to not be the most credible fact checking source, right? That isn't just like a narrative checker, then they should be able to offer their opinions on social media, right? Because I get it. Like we want to have safe platforms, right? But a lot of times these safe platforms, it's just a code word for control, because these social media platforms, they're not neutral, right? They don't allow individuals to have, for instance, like about vaccines or abortions, they don't allow individuals to offer an equal amount of, like, so if I'm pro-vaccine, right, that right now, that is way more acceptable on social media platforms all across the board than being anti-vaccine, right? How it should be is right here. And there should be a public discourse where, like I was saying before, individuals are allowed to view things across the entire spectrum on their own will and volition, to go out and view sources and differing opinions and to come to like their own conclusion. But that's not how it is, right? They're not neutral, even though it should be, according to the principle of free speech. And so I think since there is a clear bias, right? And I used this example before. There is always going to be a bias in society, right? Like if there's, I think if there's like an Instagram page promoting cannibalism, right? We obviously know we're gonna have a bias over that because of clear reasons, right? But when it comes to more practical matters that aren't like, holy shit, bro, like this is obviously horrendous, this is obviously terrible, morally reprehensible, right? We should be able to offer our opinions, right? We should be able to question things freely without the fear that social media platforms are going to come at us for misinformation and censor us for having differing opinions. Because how do you expect to have a democracy? How do you expect to have, like I was saying before, an open environment where people can just freely speak to each other? Freedom of speech really, it does exist on Instagram, but it's within boundaries, right? And so it's really not free. It's limited speech. That's what it is. It's controlled speech. So there's a clear agenda on social media platforms, right? And so this clear agenda, that's just how it is, right? I'm not saying which side's right. I'm not saying which side's wrong, right? But since there's this clear agenda that favors one opinion over others, right? And when I say over others, those other opinions aren't allowed to be advocated for. Or if they are, they get shadow banned. They don't get promoted as fairly, as equally, right? I get it. These social media platforms need to make money, right? Totally understand that. It's a business model. I understand, right? But when you're censoring things to a point where people can't even find this information, where they got to go on like jump through hoops and holes in order to find this information, or like figures like Russell Brand that have to use information on the New York Times and like walk on eggshells in order to come to a conclusion that's outside the boundary like this much. It's insane. It's like, what have we done in society, right? I'm not saying what's right. I'm not saying what's wrong. I'm not trying to make you agree with me. I'm not trying to force an opinion down your throat. I'm just trying to say that the principles we have, right, according to the Constitution, like freedom of speech, freedom of press, all these different types of things, they're not being enacted in a way that is in alignment with those principles, right? So there's a clear bias on social media where we censor individuals that have a differing opinion, right? We censor individuals that have a platform that can influence other individuals to have a differing opinion, right? And now I think in terms of hate speech, what do you deem as hate speech, right? Do you deem hate speech as misinformation? Do you deem hate speech or do you deem hate speech as something that is genuinely bringing down the character and mental health of an individual, right? Because there's a big difference there. And I know I'm probably not on the pinpoint when it comes to what is hate speech, right? But to my knowledge right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, go for it. It's totally wrong. I'm not afraid to be wrong. That's what we're here for. I'm just talking into a camera, having a conversation with myself. But what do you deem as hate speech? How do you define that? And who is defining it? Who is defining these things, right? Because most times, who is defining these things such as misinformation, disinformation, disinformation, and hate speech, right, has an agenda, right? And most times, it's going to be an opinion that allows them to control the perception of the collective, right? You could even say keep them asleep in order to keep them controlled, which allows them to further conditions that allow them to stay in control, right? Continue to make profit and stay powerful. This is evident when it comes to issues like abortion, vaccines, right? Individuals aren't even able to offer differing opinions. It's like a huge echo chamber, and anybody that offers an outside opinion is like deemed as a conspiracy theorist. And Russell Brand said this quote, right? The difference between a conspiracy theory and it actually happening is 6 months. You look at the Wuhan lab leak theory, right? At one point in time, Facebook did not allow people on their platforms to discuss that matter, right? But once it came out, and I believe the New York Times, that it was a legitimate thing that had actual evidence, people were actually allowed to talk about it freely, right? So social media platforms and media in general deem what is acceptable, deem what we can talk about, right? And it's amazing to me how these social media platforms, and I should say media platforms in general, and the government dictate what these decisive issues are, right? And dictate what is acceptable, what we can talk about, what individuals are most likely to talk about, what is the status quo, right? Like, who's setting the status quo, right? Who is the most dominant? Who is controlling the narrative, right? Because these are the big questions you got to ask yourself. There's always going to be someone that's controlling the narrative, right? There's always going to be someone that's has their hand behind these principles and is steering it in one direction, right? Now, are these principles in alignment with freedom of speech? Are they in alignment with the principles that we hold dearly to our heart, right? Do we have objective minds? Are we able to go out and search these things for ourselves? In my opinion, no. There's this bias. There's this agenda on social media, on media in general. And as I was saying before, where individuals aren't able to come to conclusions themselves and aren't able to freely search out for information. So, in my opinion, democracy is merely a disguise, right? We think we have freedom of speech, what we really don't. And so, these social media companies, right, a lot of times they censor individuals that have a differing opinion, right? Because if an individual that has a platform rises up against their narrative, it's going to shaken their ability to stay in power, ability to further conditions that allow them to stay profitable, right? To keep this matrix of control, right? And it keeps people asleep and it doesn't allow people to wake up. Now, once again, you don't have to agree with me. I'm just simply offering my opinion and how I believe it is in terms of why we live in a climate that censors certain opinions, that censors certain viewpoints for the mere fact that it causes a disruption in their ability to have open and honest conversations with people. And you got to ask yourself, why is there so much emotion wrapped up in all this? Why is there so much emotion just entangled in all these opinions? Why are we always on two extremes of the issue, right? How come we can never have an open and honest conversation where we can find some type of middle ground? Or just be like, in a calm way, just be like, hey man, listen, I know you hold this opinion. I know I hold this opinion, right? We have different things, right? We have different opinions, right? Because Joe Biden even said this himself. Like, Joe Biden used to, and you might have to double check me on this, so take it with a grain of salt. Joe Biden back in the 80s, I think, was against abortion, right? And of course, different context, different background, right? And I think he even said himself, it wasn't, or maybe it was the writer that was writing about this. I saw it in a Russell Brand video, that it wasn't even a divisive issue, right? And people would regularly change their opinions on it. But nowadays, it's super divisive, right? And people rarely change their opinion on it. And it's presented as a black and white matter, right? That this side's right, this side's wrong. That's it. When it's way more complex, way more nuances than is made out to be by the mainstream media. And so on this basis, we're just, once again, given these conclusions, given the status quo of what to believe, and we never question our own opinions, we never question outside sources, and we never think for ourselves. And even so, one, it doesn't allow us to, even if you're like ignorant to a lot of these things, and myself included, right? When conversations come up about politics, when conversations come up about hot topic issues, we're never even willing to have the conversations. Or if we're willing to have the conversations, right, it's most likely going to be divisive, and it's never going to actually lead towards a solution. It's only going to lead to people going in opposite directions and never being right. They divide us in order to control us, right? And they set these agendas, they set the narrative, they set all these different types of things that don't allow us, like I said before, to freely search for information on our own, come to our own conclusions, and think for ourselves. And I'm not perfect at this. I don't think anybody is, right? And so, I mean, I'm not going out 24/7 questioning myself. I need to do a better job of this. So this is a message for me as well. I just think it's so important, right? And this is why I try my best to have differing opinions on the podcast. And I know I could do better, right? I know I could do better. Like, I know I have a lot of people that agree with me on a lot of these issues, but I know I could have differing opinions on this podcast, and that's something I should definitely do. And I don't constantly question myself, and I don't constantly synthesize information like I always do, right? I'm just being honest. I don't. It's fucking hard. And a lot of times you don't want to do that, right? It's easy to go along with the status quo. It's easy to go along with all these things. Why? Because it's the consensus opinion, right? And it takes no effort to, agree. It takes no effort to agree, right? And so through that, you can just agree and just go along your way. But little do you know, you're being trapped in a cave that you're being oppressed in, being unfairly treated. And since you're so desensitized to it, you don't feel it affects you, and therefore you have no motivation to go out and change things. So if you're watching this video and you find, if you took even one thing away, right? If you don't like me right now, totally fine, right? Write it down below in the comment section. I won't take it personally, right? You can write whatever you want, right? I'll sift through the bullshit and I'll come out to my own conclusion. But yeah, I think it's just so important because, especially within a system that has a bottom line of profit, right? Where individuals are just in love with control or just in love with power, right? And rightfully so, right? They can do so many things with it, right? And I'm not saying it's justified, right? But it's tempting. And I'm sure if I was in their position, I would be tempted to do the same thing too. But I think from an ordinary person's perspective, I think just as us as individuals in ordinary society that have the power to collectively change our beliefs, to collectively change what the status quo is just by us deeming what is acceptable, just changing our beliefs, our habits, our internal values, right? We can change these and we can enact, and I guess you could even say cause, or no, I don't want to say force, but like get a good movement going that allows social media companies and the government to be in the overall culture, which moves slower than a goddamn snail, but to change into something that we all can have, because it is possible. It is possible. We just believe it isn't. But if you believe it, but it can be, right? It can be. And if we all share these beliefs, right, and we act in alignment with these beliefs, we enforce these principles with our actions, we can make this reality a reality. And so I know I kind of jumped all over the place this episode, and I kind of feel like, what the fuck did I just talk about? But once again, if you took anything away from this episode, make sure you let me know about down below in the comment section. Did emotions come up for you? Did feelings come up for you? How did you feel when I brought up abortion? How did you feel when I brought up vaccines? How did you feel when I brought up these divisive issues, right? Did you feel like oh God, I'm going to click off this video because it's making me uncomfortable? Or did you genuinely observe your emotions, have this spiritual practice, and have an open mind, empathize, and next time this conversation comes up, when it does, are you going to participate? I'm not saying you have to, but are you going to listen with an open mind? Are you going to take things into consideration that you didn't take into consideration before? Or are you just going to stick with the viewpoints that you've always held and never change them? That's up for you to decide, right? I'm not the one that does that, but I think it's important that you really, really analyze where you're getting your information from, who is the information coming from, and like, what is the agenda they have? Is it for ordinary people or for their own benefit? I hope I was able to answer those questions for you guys. And yeah, I think that's pretty good. I'm not going to go through all the other questions because I think they're not really on topic. And once again, you don't have to agree with me. I'm sorry if I conveyed a little bit of what I thought too much in this episode, but oh well. Fuck it. But yeah, guys, that has been episode number 67 of the Conscious Cast. I'm your host, Cal, along with my other boy, not Mr. Jason Scalora. He will be back next week. So yeah, guys, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe on this YouTube video. Love yourself because I love you. Stay handsome, and we are clocking out, people. Peace.